And right on cue. And then you'll notice that we had everyone be muted upon entry. If you're interested in speaking, just raise your hand, ideally through the Zoom way, but you can just wave at us. But if you want to be unmuted, we can do that for you. To raise your hand in Zoom, you look at the bottom of your screen where it says participants. And I turned off the, there's no way to raise their hand. Dave.
It's right in the raise. It's right at the bottom. It's a separate thing next to the share screen, isn't it?
I'm sorry. As the host, my screen looks different. So I'm going to trust you all can raise your hand. And that's how we'll assume that you want to be called on to speak. So in the meantime, go take it over, George.
Okay. So this is our first sort of public, we want to call it a hearing, but it's really just us hearing what people have to say about the Homeowner Assistance Fund and how we in Vermont should be using it. And I think I'm not sure how much preview Maura gave, but we'll do some PowerPoint slides just to sort of give a brief sort of description of where we are. And then I think we're going to just open it up to everyone, to the extent folks have some ideas or want to raise some issues. It'll be hopefully more of a discussion than us talking at you or you guys necessarily just talking at us. So cover page, obviously, the Homeowner Assistance Fund is a federally financed fund that comes out of the new American Rescue Plan Act. It is separate from the CARES Act. The CARES Act was what we used to fund the mortgage assistance program. These are the statistics from last year's version that when we went over the summer and into November. So we had 636 households. We gave out approximately a total of $4.5 million. $4.2 million. And that program, at that time, the maximum benefit was 6 months. Actually, we can go to the next slide. The maximum program benefit was 6 months. The mortgage holder is required to apply. They had to be in arrears at the time. They had to have a COVID hardship. We had income restrictions, and both as to the hardship statements and as to income, it was all self-certified. People would just tell us how much they made, and we didn't require any backup information. They just were required to attest, subject to perjury. Manufactured homes were included in what was covered, though if you were on in a manufactured home park, the lot rent we sent people over to the VSHA's rental assistance program, since those weren't considered mortgagee type of payments, and we figured rents are rents, and so VSHA could help them with that. And we also included delinquent taxes to the extent people who had mortgages weren't having their taxes escrowed. We had everything online as our application. Various nonprofit entities helped us out with the outreach to folks who might have issues with connectivity or issues with mobility or English proficiency. Payments were made directly to either the mortgage servicer or to the town for property taxes. And as a general matter, our applicant base and the folks that we were able to help out tended to be younger, have more racial diversity and have larger households than we necessarily see with the general population, which, is not a surprise. I think, especially, younger households with more children were obviously more likely to be impacted by various things related to COVID. And then this past month, we relaunched MAP with some additional funds that were given to us from the state. Again, this was CARES Act money, not Homeowner Assistance Fund money. So we basically are using the same criteria as last year, though now the maximum benefit is 12 months of mortgage payments rather than 6. And we are, just to sort of get people in the swing of providing income verification documentation, we're starting to ask for tax returns for folks who've completed their taxes for 2020 to show their 2020 income. Because it is our understanding that for Homeowner Assistance Fund, we will not be allowed to just base our income qualification on self-certification. So, but other than that, as to the COVID hardship, we're still basing that on a self-certification. We've had very good demand. We've got over 300 applications. We're up to requests for almost $3.7 million. And we have about $4.5 million to give out. So this money obviously is needed. There are plenty of people who are looking for it and who will probably qualify for it. So I think it's an indication that, the Homeowner Assistance Fund program is definitely still needed, even if the pandemic, hopefully the harshest aspects of the pandemic are being alleviated. So the HAF program itself is nationwide, like $10 billion. We have in Vermont got the small state minimum, which is $50 million. The purpose of the Homeowner Assistance Fund is it's a bit broader than what the CARES Act mortgage assistance was. Homeowner assistance is to prevent mortgage delinquencies and defaults, foreclosures, loss of utilities and home services, and displacement of homeowners experiencing financial hardship after January 21, 2020. So it's basically, as long as you're a homeowner, various costs associated with homeownership can be, we can help with that. So it's not necessarily just people who have mortgages that can be helped. And it doesn't necessarily limit a mortgage. In the case of HAF, is any sort of secured loan relating to ownership of your residence. So it's not necessarily limited to sort of purchase money mortgages. It can be home equity loan. It could be some sort of second loan. It can be a reverse mortgage. It can be a chattel loan for a mobile home. It's a fairly broad criteria, and the types of other expenses are also fairly broad. The requirements include creating a HAF plan that we have to submit to the Treasury by June 30th for them to approve and then start doling out the money to us. And the purpose of this meeting is obviously to get your thoughts, or to spark some thoughts and maybe get them, as follow-up on, who the eligible household should be, what kind of eligible expenses we should be looking at, how we should set up the process for application, how, most significantly, what kind of outreach do we need to do? I mean, we've had obviously some experience with mortgage assistance, but again, this is a bit broader, and we'd really like to make sure we don't miss people. So first, let's just go through the basic federal requirements. Federal permitted uses, let's put it that way. So there's mortgage payment assistance, There's financial assistance to allow a homeowner to reinstate a mortgage or pay other housing related costs related to a period of forbearance, delinquency, or default. So even if somebody is all the way down the road in foreclosure, we could pay all the costs related to getting them back into a reinstated mode if the servicer is willing to work with us. We can do principal reduction, including with respect to second mortgages that have been provided by like a CHT soft second or a ground lease type situation. Mortgage interest rate reductions, delinquent property taxes, counseling and education by HUD, counseling agencies for folks who really have a broad group of needs that they have to work through. And then payment assistance for all kinds of housing related costs like utilities, internet, insurance, homeowner association fees, and down payment assistance loans that have been provided. And then we can take other measures to prevent displacement, to finance home repairs, to allow folks to, stay in their houses, or to receive clear title to properties if for whatever reason there's some kind of cloud on the title that requires some money to resolve. At least 60% of the funds have to be used for households earning less than 100% of the area median income, the greater of the area median income or the US median income. And these numbers on this chart are all fairly preliminary because we're not sure what the US median income number is going to be, what that number is going to be. There is a HUD US median, but it is not generated for this particular program, and there hasn't been any guidance yet as to specifically what number they're going to have us point to. But this is sort of our best guesstimate is what we're looking at for four-person household income levels in the various Vermont counties that we'll be looking at for the 100% threshold. So the remaining funds, the remaining 40% can be used to target socially advantaged individuals. And again, here's the sort of the statutory definition is those who have been subjected to racial or ethnic prejudice or cultural bias because of their identity as members of group without regard to their individual qualities. Disadvantage must stem from circumstances beyond their control, and there is a rebuttable presumption that their following individuals are socially disadvantaged: Black Americans, Hispanic Americans, Native Americans, and Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. An individual who is not part of that sort of group that have the rebuttable presumption can take steps to, show that they are part of a socially disadvantaged group. It is through a process that's outlined in actually the SBA guidelines. But I think this is sort of the basic, covers pretty much everybody that we're thinking of. Where are we next? So the HAF program, the HAF guide, the HAF plan, has to include a data-driven assessment of homeowner needs, a program description of the program or programs that are being suggested, methods for targeting the funding, how the models are based on best practices or previous programs, performance goals, both as to who's being targeted and the dollar amounts that we're targeting to be used in particular programs, what our administrative readiness is, and a budget, basically, and obviously, we want to be as detailed but as vague as we can be to allow for reaction to what ultimately happens and not lock ourselves too much into any particular trajectory if we find that other avenues appear. The data-driven assessment needs, we're looking at what are the characteristics of the homeowners with the high needs, who should we include as eligible households, who might slip through the cracks of eligibility, what best practices are out there that we can look to, who should be engaged in the program design, and how do we define and how do we determine whether or not the program is being administered in an equitable way to all those who might benefit from it. Go ahead. So obviously, the experience that we have really has been through the mortgage assistance program, and I think we're going to, in some respects, rely a lot of on our experience there for a lot of these things when it comes to designing the new program, especially as it relates to specifically mortgage assistance and property tax assistance. But obviously, we don't. Other than that, we don't have a lot of experience. There's also some websites indicated which have information about the Homeowner Assistance Fund, one through our national association, the NCSHA, has a good site. And then the US Treasury has guidance that they've published as well on their website that is also fairly helpful, but fairly preliminary. We're hoping that we will be getting more guidance from the Treasury as time goes by, both to help us understand things like the income requirements and what indexes we can rely on for that purpose, and very basic things like whether or not the benefit to the homeowner would be considered taxable income, which has a cascading effect on the kind of information we're required to keep and the administrative cost to us, and also would affect some of the decision making, I think, by some folks who might apply. So as a general matter, after this, obviously you can always send me an email, gdemas@vhfa.org. My address, or send me a letter or at VHFA. We are having another public session on Thursday afternoon at 5, and then on June 22nd, to the extent that we actually manage to have a draft half planned by then, hopefully we will. We'd like to have another session just to sort of go over it and get folks' thoughts about that. So that's sort of where we are on all of this. And I guess first, I'd just like to open it out to the folks here and see if anybody has any particular comments or questions that they might have as to what we want to do with the program.
George, thanks for going through all that. I'm gonna be totally honest. If you haven't met me, I'm Maura Collins with VHFA. We put out all our Zoom information to the universe because we really wanted this to be open and accessible to everyone who cares about this topic. And then it dawned on us that maybe we were putting ourselves open to having some kind of Zoom bombing experience. Seeing that there are only 11 of us in the room here, though, I'm gonna send out a thing to have you all unmute. Doesn't mean you have to do it, but at least you'll have the ability to jump into the conversation, since it is just 11 of us, and we can start dialogue. If there were 1,000 of you and I didn't recognize your faces, I'd be a lot more nervous to do that, but so far I think I know most of you.
I think, well, Grace, I believe you have sent us some material, which is great. I mean, it's nice to have your input. But one of the things that you had raised was, reverse mortgages, for example. And oh, now you can't unmute again. Oh my goodness.
Okay.
Oh, there you are.
I'm
Okay.
unmuted now. Sorry about that. Yeah, and I was wondering, George, whether you and Maura received VLA's recommendations that I sent out. I think it was Friday
Friday
afternoon, right before I
evening, yeah.
left for the long Memorial Day weekend. It was on the to-do list to get out.
Exactly. I was like, oh, yay, Grace has sent me a big pile of attachments. Yes, we got it.
Okay.
I haven't had a chance to really read it thoroughly, but it's nice. I mean, certainly it's great to have, your organization's thoughts on structure and, the things that we should be keeping in mind as we're setting up the program for sure.
Yeah, and I will recommend that you dig through the model plan and common application, and that was put together by sort of a coalition of mortgage advocacy groups, NCLC, Americans for Financial Reform, with feedback and input from state and local mortgage advocates as well.
Right.
And so, there's a lot that we support in those documents and proposed plan. There's a couple of things that we think might be burdensome based on our experience with homeowners. I mean, one of our big things is minimize the input and agreement necessary from mortgage servicers for people to access these funds. So, one of the programs that the coalition has suggested is one where someone who's delinquent can apply for up to a maximum amount of funds to go towards their delinquency, not necessarily to reinstate, but that those funds would be tied to loss mitigation through the servicer. So,
Mhm.
I mean, I assume, although I don't know for certain, that VHFA is going to land on a maximum amount that any one homeowner can access in a grant through the homeowner assistance plan. And if that's true, you will have some homeowners who were in the foreclosure process well before the pandemic started, and because they've sort of been in that no man's land where
Mhm.
the foreclosure moratorium has meant the foreclosure can't move forward, but they also can't be making payments during this period because partial payments aren't going to be accepted. You'll have some homeowners who just have a huge arrearage. And we don't want those funds to have to be tied to an agreement on the part of the loan servicer on the front end saying, yes, we'll modify the loan. What we're hoping for is there's a max grant amount and people can access those funds. They have to be put towards the delinquency. And then those folks can be connected with either housing counseling services or legal services to assist them with what we know can be a very difficult and Byzantine process to get through loss mitigation with a servicer. So that was, for example, one of the changes that we recommended from what that national group is advocating.
Yeah, and I think that that's a trick. I mean, as you know, that can be tricky because if you send the mortgage servicer money and they don't have a system to apply it unless there's some arrangement made already, then they often will just kick it back. And then it's sort of like, okay, well, nobody did anything. So one of the hopes is that I believe CFPB is sort of on this to encourage the mortgage servicers, at least the national ones, to be flexible and take these payments and apply them and be glad that they're reducing their past due levels, which is I think a big thing. And we are hopefully going to be entering into these common data agreements with the larger servicers that will, for example, the standard that was used back with hardest hit funds had a provision in there that said that if we tell you that we're looking at somebody, you agree that you aren't going to move forward with any kind of foreclosure action for 45 days. So hopefully by that spurs some discussion to get a resolution by the time we're ready to spit out some money.
Right. And my hope is, I mean, given how much is coming into the state, and you all maybe have some more perspective on this based on the amount in grants that went out the door through the MAP programs. But my sense is that the vast majority of folks will be able to cure their
Mhm.
delinquencies
No,
with
it's true.
maximum grant amount, and there'll be a much smaller pool of folks that just can't quite get their delinquency fully resolved without some other kind of loss mitigation or, work through the
Right,
servicer.
right. Yeah, no, hopefully it will be a small group of people, and that something can at least be done to reduce their debt somehow. Um,
Which
So
may
I don't
allow,
want to monopolize the conversation.
yeah, that's
I'll
okay.
mute myself and encourage others to jump in.
yeah, that may allow us to have a more, based on our map experience and the data that we're getting from actually the Treasury Department on delinquencies. I'm hoping we'll be able to sort of have an appropriate size and scope of that maximum benefit amount. And then maybe plus it up a bit just to make sure that we're being, I don't know, I don't want people to have to apply multiple times, things like that, but then maybe there will be an exception situation where, under certain circumstances, you could surpass that maximum if, these things. I don't know what that is. I'm just saying, additionally, it may be helpful to know that George and I are on a twice a week call with all the national servicers organized through the a trade organization that I'm brinking on the
It's the something housing coalition.
housing HPC something. Anyway, it's all like Quicken and US Bank and all these big ones are on it. And so that's been helpful. A lot of organizations, states, and there's actually only about 6 state HFAs who are on this call, but there are a lot of servicers who have experience with the hardest hit fund program, HHF, which you'll hear George and I reference a lot because that came out of the 2008 financial crisis. And while Vermont was not one of the 12 or 16 states that received that money, that really is being seen as a model of what could work here. And we're trying to learn from those lessons. And so there is talk about a common data platform that and common agreement and third-party releases and things like that to just standardize a lot of the back and forth between servicers and the NVHFA. But additionally, I think it's interesting that Treasury and CFPB and some others are on those calls as well, so that CFPB, I think, can be a help in making sure that what gets set up will be in the consumer's best interest.
So the one other quick comment that I will make is I've been pretty heavily involved on the VRAP side of things, the Vermont Emergency Rental Assistance
Mm-hmm.
Program that was just implemented early April. And thankfully, I don't think there are quite as many program requirements and restrictions, which will certainly help. But there have been a lot of issues on that side of things for our clients because the application is really only accessible online and it's pretty complicated to get through. It's not a user-friendly system. I mean, we're having a really hard time with that. So, to the extent possible, I really encourage VHFA to think about making the application as simple and straightforward as possible, requiring as little documentation as possible, making it available online, but also making paper applications available, potentially taking applications over the phone to the extent possible. I mean, that's really a big part of where the barrier is right now on the VRAP side of things. So anything that you all can do to make it as accessible as possible is going to be really important.
Yeah, I mean, our goal is obviously to make. I mean, we would prefer to do as much as we could based on self-certifications, because collecting extra pieces of paper just requires more work from us, and also, as you say, it slows people down and it creates every kind of possible way that things can go wrong. So But again, we're sort of stuck with the requirements that we have to deal with. And that's unfortunately one of the bits of guidance that we haven't got a whole lot of from the Treasury yet, as to what level of income documentation or hardship documentation they're going to be looking for. And fingers crossed, we'll be fairly flexible. Chris Trombley, you had your hand up.
Wait, there we go. Ask to unmute. Did that
And
work?
you can't.
Yeah, thank
There you go.
All right.
There it is.
All right, excellent. Hey, thanks, Chris Trombley, People's United Bank. I work with the loss mitigation and collections group. Some of the feedback that we've heard initially is that a lot of customers are have not filed their 2020 tax returns, and a lot are asking for extensions. And I heard you had mentioned that was the primary income verification source. So when you hear feedback about limiting the documentation, would you consider alternatives to a tax return if those aren't available?
Well, for the current mortgage assistance, we do ask for it, but if if someone hasn't filed their 2020 return yet, what we ask them to do is self-certify as to the most recent 90-day income. So technically, you don't have to have it if you haven't filed it yet. As to Homeowner Assistance Fund, yeah, I mean, it would probably then be pay stubs and statements from unemployment insurance, things like that. That would be the backup, to the extent that self-certification isn't permitted. And we're hoping that I'm hoping that we can continue on with the self-certification process, but I'm not super hopeful that that actually is going to come true.
I can say on the VRAP side of
Mhm.
things, I mean, Treasury is allowing for folks who, because there is going to be some portion of the population that doesn't file taxes because they're under the filing threshold. And so they are allowing for folks who haven't filed 2020 taxes to prove 2020 annual income through W-2s, 1099s, annual benefit statements. So I would assume that, that the Treasury guidance is going to track that pretty closely for the HAF program. And of course, they are also allowing exceptions to even the income documentation in situations where people have some kind of barrier, either a disability or a technology barrier or some other barrier related to COVID, where they can't produce documentation. And I will say one of the problems on the VRAP side with that is that VSHA and the vendor had not sort of created systems for how to decide, or forms for, people who really need that kind of a waiver of income documentation.
Right.
So that would be great if VHFA was thinking about that, what are the circumstances under which we can provide a waiver to income documentation, and what's the outward facing message about that. So on the application, maybe you see something that says,
Right.
if you haven't filed taxes, if you don't have proof of income or can't access it because of a disability or because of a technology issue, submit this form, or, whatever it is, so that people.
Right. Is it some sort of just an affidavit that they file then to say that they can't get at it? Is that what they do? You don't know.
We're still trying to get clarification
Oh.
on that. And so, on a case by case basis, we'll just be advocating with VSHA for our clients that can't produce those income documents. But it is part of their admin plan. And I don't know how helpful it is to take a look at VSHA's admin plan for the VRAP program. But there are definitely circumstances that they've determined that comply with Treasury's guidance where they can take self-certification even on income.
Right. Yeah. It's different acts that the money comes from. So I don't know whether that's good or bad when it comes to what kind of guidance we're going to end up getting.
Well, I will say that the Biden administration put out new Treasury guidance that sort of loosened some of the requirements. And my guess is that this Treasury department is going to want to, make things the least restrictive as possible, or at least that's the trend we've seen, even with the ERAP funds, which were through that stimulus that passed prior to the Biden
Right.
administration coming in. And there was some old, Treasury guidance on it that has since been loosened by this administration. So that's
Right.
maybe hopeful
Fingers
for
crossed.
the HAF program. Yeah.
Right. Fingers crossed.
Chris, to go back to your question, the MAP program that we began in 2020, we purposefully did not ask for tax returns, and we were looking at, very short-term income because we knew that this crisis hit people and hit them hard and recently, and so 2019 taxes were a moot point. But right now, based on the guidance we have, it does say that we do need to go more than self-attestation. So we're going to try to walk that line. But I'm hearing what you're saying, which is, what are these, when would that be waived? And Grace, I'm hearing your experience of like, the sooner we can think through all the ways, all the times we'd allow it to be waived, and then the different documents that we would allow as an alternate would be helpful. So those are really good points.
Yeah.
Would there be any communication with the servicers, if they've applied for this and maybe they don't, we're not, Peoples isn't servicing their loan, where there'd be communication that they have applied and that's in process? If someone's started the foreclosure process, we're going down that road and maybe it's coming to the end of that timeline. If there's an awareness that there might be assistance funds on the way, I'm not sure what that engagement might look like.
Yeah, Chris, like I said, the way that the agreements with the servicers work, at least as to the common data platform, where the information is sent, through just a portal back and forth, is that once the servicer hears from us that somebody has applied, they would agree that they aren't going to take any actions for 45 days to see how the process goes. I know that for the MAP program, we have had loans that have been serviced through Peoples, that we don't have the common data platform agreements up. I think what happens now is people just call you. I think it's either Darren or Polly from our shop calls you guys and says, I've got these number of people and here's the information. They send an email over that sort of lays it out. And, are these your borrowers, and will you, if we send you this money, are you going to apply it to their loans? And as long as you guys say yes, that's what we do. Yeah.
To go back to a point that was sort of in between the lines of some of the conversation we've talked about, which is making sure we've thought through everything before we launch the program, so that we don't, we wouldn't ever intentionally jerk customers around, but clear and consistent communication is always helpful when you're talking to the public writ large. And so in many ways, I think Vermont is in a very enviable position, because we have had these two different infusions of what's going to be $10 million of mortgage assistance program funding. So it buys us a little time, is what I'm trying to say. And so what you may see is VHFA launching a program that's maybe 2 weeks later than it would have been if there were no mortgage assistance program, because we're really trying to make sure we get it right out of the gate, and engaging in conversations with all of you and with big national servicers and local Vermont servicers and advocates and homeownership centers and different nonprofit organizations that work with people in a service capacity. So while the plan is due to Treasury on June 30th, if we don't believe that we've answered enough questions to design this plan at that point, we can tell Treasury by June 30th, hey, we're 80% of the way there. We need till July, whatever. And that's going to be okay with Treasury. They've been very clear about that. Meaning our program may not launch. I mean, until later as we work through all these details. So I'm hoping that the availability of the mortgage assistance program, which is very flexible and broad, will alleviate any concerns that would normally come up as a result of not being able to launch a program like half just yet. So I'm gonna just put in the chat that, you know, we do have on our website the application. It's really helpful, especially for those of you servicers on the call, or, you know, all of you work with customers in different ways. You know, Jonathan, maybe HFI could do some kind of blast to your residents or to your customers, if you're a servicer, around making sure they're applying for that MAP money now. Because at some point, there will be a gap between these programs. And I know that's going to make people nervous. But additionally, in terms of clear communication with customers, we won't be running two parallel programs with two different income levels and two different documentation requirements and all that. That not only is there not going to be enough MAP money, but it's just that wouldn't be beneficial to the public. So we will be closing the MAP program, especially when we run out of money, which we're going through it pretty quickly. So getting people in soon would be really helpful. I don't know if Ben or who else? I don't know who. K, what that stands for. Jonathan, any of you have thoughts on this? Oh, Leslie, you need help unmuting? Here you go. I clicked it.
Thank you. Ben is our new housing fellow.
Oh, right. Sorry. I got that email this morning.
Yeah, this is his first day, and Mia is onboarding him, and I haven't met him yet either, but I'm glad that he's able to listen in to our public meeting.
Fantastic.
Welcome, Ben.
So, Jonathan, Grace, Chris, pressure's on you.
I just keep thinking about obviously mobile home residents and whether it's traditional loans and how you market to them, because when they hear mortgage, they just automatically tune out that whoever is sending them what they're trying to help them with just doesn't get their situation. And, oh, I don't have a traditional mortgage, so I'm just moving on.
Right.
And so I think some sort of marketing material, I think for our purposes, one thing that would help us, we can send anything to our residents, something that's on your letterhead and provided to us, we can stuff with our information. And I think that has a bigger impact. Not to say that we would limit what we would send to residents, but I think that having a contact to come back to you in something that we send is the easiest way to do that versus us creating something ourselves and clumsily sending it to residents and causing more frustration and communication than necessary. I know the mobile home program, they have a newsletter that used to go out regularly to about 800 folks in Vermont that are throughout the state. And that's another path that you might want to consider, postcards for their mailing list. And then my kind of the thing in the back of my mind is because this is a larger program and because things are improving, if there may be a way to leverage this money in other ways that would help low-income households reduce their burden, whether it's like the cost of going through refinancing process while interest rates are low. But I know this is, really for emergency funds. I don't know, because it was ARPA funds, if that had that flexibility or if that was something that was being discussed, or that would be a separate program at a later date.
Well, it can, for example, if you be used for interest buy downs, but those are basically with the same lender, as some sort of restated loan terms. One of the benefits for folks in the mobile home parks is that we can use this money for lot rent, for example. As opposed to the CARES Act money, we weren't using that for lot rent. So we can cover lot rent, and mobile homeowners have property taxes too. So even if they, if they have a small mortgage loan, a chattel loan, we'll call it, on their places, but they're behind on their property taxes, we can help them with property taxes as well. But yeah, I think using the park notice system would be a good idea for getting that information out. I mean, if we use the term homeowner, does that sort of term, that's a good one. Okay, so yeah, I just don't use the word mortgage, I think is the big thing, right?
Mhm. Yes, Chris, great. I'm sorry, that was Grace, not Chris. I'm sure Chris is thinking great thoughts in his head. Grace, good idea. We've already been starting communication with the town clerks and working through Vermont League of Cities and Towns and others to try to get that out. But you're exactly right. We know that I actually hear about it mostly through legislative members who know of a tax sale that's coming up and want, quick immediate action, which is fine. And we've been able to work with folks in that way, but that kind of proactive communication town folks would be really helpful. I agree.
Yeah, we've had, I mean, some town clerks have asked about what they could put up on their websites to, direct people to the program. So that's been really, really good. And that's for this CARES Act program. It'd be even better for the HAF.
If I may, does anyone have any ideas around my favorite topic of data? One thing we need to prove to US Treasury is that for all these good ideas, we have to show why there's need. So Jonathan, like, why would there be a need in a manufactured home community for this kind of assistance? Like, what are the size and scope? I'm well aware of Arthur Hamlin's data at the state in terms of broad numbers, but if there were HFI being the largest community owner in the state, I believe if there was any data that HFI had on your parks in terms of incomes or delinquencies, or I don't know what or why you would have this information, but if it was out there, it would be helpful. Grace, if there was information on calls you're getting around mortgage stuff, that would be helpful. Just to, it may not be universal, the universe of the need, but it could be that kind of color commentary that helps our plan in terms of the socially disadvantaged communities. Some states, New Hampshire, Oregon, and us, we're kind of talking about, could we have manufactured home communities be a socially disadvantaged community and define them as having been discriminated against because of the difference between chattel loans and mortgages, and that there is this historic discriminatory practice in favor about the mobileness of these residences, which we hopefully know are not mobile at all. So that is an area we're looking at. I'm not quite sure that's necessary because I bet you a lot of those residents are going to fall under the 100% AMI anyway. So, if you have ideas of populations besides the obvious presumed ones of racial minorities, who we should argue should be a socially disadvantaged community, we're open to your ideas about that. But Jonathan, you were.
Yeah, I will say Arthur has some of the state collected information, but I go back to the USDA RD funded surveying that was done at UVM 2010, 2011. Without going into a lot of details, those numbers seem to be holding up, at least within HFI's portfolio. And so just to kind of review, it's, an average income of about $36,000, average age around 55, 56, but that is probably the metric that's aged up a little bit. Family size of 2, high precedence of some form of disability, and then the lack of mobility of the home, 76 to 80%, depending on where you are in the country, the homes don't move.
Right.
So I've had some conversations. The legislature legislature is actually very interested in updating that study because it was done after the 2010 census. It really did hold its value because the American surveys don't adequately survey Vermont statistically. But now that we're about to have the new census information, hopefully in September, maybe October, it'll be interesting to see some of the methodology changes that occurred and if mobile homes were actually added back as a factor that could be sorted through in that data. If not, then there seems to be interest in funding another statewide survey of mobile home residents. And that 2010 survey had over 400 respondents, which when you look at the subset of the 7,200 mobile home residents was a pretty big cross section. So it was more than statistically significant, but folks didn't understand some of the methodology that went into getting that survey that was done. But as far as HFI goes, it was interesting when I came to HFI, taking that survey, applying it to our population of 1,000 residents, 1/7 of the overall population, it still seems to hold up, which is troubling to me because income hasn't changed much in that. Now that look is not something I would publish a paper on, but that's just kind of the back of the back of the napkin look on that. On those
No,
numbers.
that's helpful. And I've seen the UVM team present that information, so we can follow up to get a bunch of those specifics.
Yeah, and the two people kind of leading that charge, or actually three people. So it's Dr. Dan Baker, who is involved but isn't directly involved in it currently. Senior instructor Kelly Hamshaw, who's currently in the process of getting her PhD, and of which we'll be publishing more data on that information. And then, not uncoincidentally, her husband, Dr. Scott Hamshaw, who's an engineer, who did all the flood maps and risk profiles from the physical vulnerabilities. So that gives a good cross section of academics that could provide some input to
And they're all
establishing mobile home residents in Vermont as a socially disadvantaged group permanently, as opposed to doing it case by case by case.
all very smart people, especially Kelly, who was my student at UVM when she was in grad school, taking a housing policy class. So I like to claim a little credit. Grace, Chris, Karen, any final thoughts in our last 5 minutes? Okay. Oh,
Oh.
Are you having trouble unmuting? Here you go. I know, it's us. We got nervous. Sorry.
Sorry. I just wondered whether you think it's useful for the same players to be in the hearing on the 3rd. You're going to do the same
You're
spiel in the
welcome
beginning
to
and try and solicit some. Okay.
No,
Yeah.
the one in
I don't like to miss anything, but
we have 4. If you can't tell by the names, there's only 4 of you who are not VHFA staff on this call right now. So I don't know what kind of turnout we'll get on Thursday, but if you want to give up your dinner hour, you are always welcome to join us. But no, the presentation, everything will be exactly the same as this. In a couple of weeks, if we have a half plan, which I want to float the idea that we may not, depending on our regular calls with Treasury, and if we think guidance is imminent, or if we're having a hard time nailing down all this data, and a few more weeks is going to get us more clarity, there is a chance we may punt this a little bit, because not punt because we're not working on it, but punt because we think that things will be more clear in an extra couple weeks. But
I will say, before being involved in the VRAP program, I probably would have pushed for the funds to be available as quickly as possible. But having been involved in the soft
Right.
launch on that side of things that went so poorly, I guess I would encourage you all to take the time that you need, particularly because there is a MAP program. At present, there's still a foreclosure moratorium in effect, and we know even when the moratorium is lifted, which, it probably will be, foreclosure is a long process. So I think it's really important to get it right before this is rolled out.
Right. No, absolutely. I agree wholeheartedly. We were kind of glad for the ERAP just because it allowed us. Sorry, my dog has decided to go crazy. just because it did exactly what you said. It provided us with a little window as to all the issues that might come up and things that we would need to learn that we had not seen yet with the map. So it's been an eye opener for all of us.
Yeah, and George is talking with Kathleen as often as she'll answer his calls because she's so busy right now. But and so we before anything happens, we will be debriefing in more detail with them, both about their vendor, their experience, their program limits, and things like that. So,
Right.
And have you all made a decision? I mean, do we know for certain that the administration will stay in all aspects of the program will stay in-house with VHFA, or is there some talk of using a vendor?
oh, we'll likely use a vendor. We
will.
don't have the ability to stand up a call center that would, especially, you know, to the points you were making about needing to take applications over the phone and things like that. I would anticipate a vendor. We put out an RFP for that, 2 weeks ago, George.
Week and a half.
Yeah, that's due in the future.
Next
And
week. Next Friday.
yeah, so I would the question is, of the, I'm making up a number, of the 50 things we need done, how many would be done by a vendor and how many would be done in-house is the question. You know, is it just going to be an online portal, or is it also going to have a call center? Is it going to be
Are they going to do the back end? Are they going to do the marketing? You know, there's a whole litany of things they can do or not do. I mean, we have some staff that we can dedicate to it, but it's not a lot. And so we just need to figure out what the wisest use.
Right. I will caution again, we've had so many, I mean, the problems really have been on the part of the vendors, and it hasn't been, you know, a customer friendly experience at all. And I think part of that was because of a hasty rollout and there wasn't sufficient training for, you know, the call center staff or the back end case managers. There's a lot of confusion on their part about requirements and what documents need to be provided. So again, take your time. Take your time.
Absolutely.
Make sure that, you know, to the extent you're using vendors, you've got, you know, they're well trained and they understand the program requirements. And
and that was you know, and the vendor is one issue, but also I think there was a lot of changes by Treasury during the process, right? I mean, they were trying to get things going, but you know, every week new guidance would come out, things would change. They'd had to change the documentation, they had to change the steps, they had to change the questions. It was, my understanding is that it was an accumulation of various people's lack of organization that resulted in that. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely a cautionary tale, and
we will benefit from the HHF experience. You know, the fact that there are software vendors who've been running this kind of program for the last 12 years. That's one of the questions in our RFP is what, you know, how much have you done this? Whereas ERAP was brand new to everyone.
Right.
So there was nothing based it on. But Chris, you want to jump in?
Oh yeah, just real quick. One, thanks for all your work in this space. This is fantastic. If should somebody slip into foreclosure and for some reason they didn't apply, is there some formal process with the judiciary where they can be engaged through the mediation process and they can kind of be pushed through this? Sometimes, you know, that's a great way to engage customers is if they do land in the foreclosure process and how to connect them with the resources they need.
Well, I encourage, obviously, if you have a customer who's in that process and the mediation, then definitely let them know this is available to them. You know, I know I've talked in connection with the MAP program, Grace and I have dealt with a couple of situations where, you know, we've had folks, but it is hard. I mean, I think that's been an issue with the rental assistance too, is that some people just don't want to do it. And, you know, they, for whatever reason, they're not interested. And so you're going to have some of that, but a lot of it is to just getting the word out and making sure people understand this is available and it is for real and you can get some, and this will help you. And there is a benefit to it. And there, you know, don't let your sort of pessimism as a result of everything that's happened, keep you from trying this, because it is an opportunity.
So, but you bring up a good point about our outreach and engagement to include the courts. I mean, I don't know if we can require someone to apply, as George is pointing out, but we certainly can make sure George is a member of the bar and all sorts of associations of lawyers across the state. So we can make sure that we're communicating the availability of this to the courts. I will tell you in our last 2 minutes over that just some notes I took of things was, talking about the maximum grant amount and when, what that may include, when we're going to waive income documentations. Think about that now, about what would the situation be? What would those waivers look like? And customizing communication for manufactured home community residents. Looking at UVM's 2010 data set on manufactured home residents and reaching out to the courts and associated legal side, encouraging people to apply. Those were a lot of the main takeaways I took. So if there's more, feel free to let us know. We're always willing. We'll make sure that those slides are posted on our website too by the end of the week. So.
Very good. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.